Hello, and welcome back to our quiet space. Take this moment to find your place of comfort, letting the day and all its noise begin to fade into a gentle hum. Allow your body to feel heavy, your mind to feel light. Here, there is nothing you need to do, nothing to solve. There is only the story. Before we begin our journey tonight, I'd love to feel the shape of our small community, gathered here in this space from all corners of the world. If you feel moved to, I invite you to leave a comment letting us know where you're listening from and what time it is in your part of the world. It's a quiet wonder to think of us all, connected by this single story under 1,000 different skies. Tonight, our journey takes us through the veils of time, exploring chapters of our shared past that are by turns harsh, brilliant, defiant, and mysterious. We will begin by feeling the biting cold of a medieval winter, a world of pure survival. Then, we will travel to the glittering, dangerous court of Tudor England to witness the astonishing rise and fall of a queen who changed a kingdom. From there, we will cross an ocean and a revolution to a harbour in Boston, where a single act of defiance lit the spark of a new nation. And finally, we will journey further back than you can possibly imagine, to a silent, forgotten city in the Peruvian desert, a place that rewrites the very beginning of civilization in the Americas. So, dim the lights, let your breathing slow to a gentle, easy rhythm, and let our story begin. When we think of the Middle Ages, our minds often conjure images of jousting knights, of grand feasts in stone castles, of merry fairs on a village green. But for the average person, the vast majority of the population, life was a far simpler and often harsher reality. And nowhere was this reality more stark than in the grip of winter. For the medieval peasant, winter was less about merriment and more about a single consuming question: how do we not die tonight? It wasn't just a season, it was a test of endurance, a recurring trial that came around every year like an especially cruel teacher who didn't believe in second chances. Imagine yourself, for a moment, living in a tiny hut made of mud and sticks. The walls are so thin, you could probably hear a bird sneeze from the field outside. There is no insulation as we would know it. There are no glass windows, unless you count a small, square hole in the wall, perhaps stuffed with a greased animal skin to keep out the worst of the wind. And there is definitely no thermostat to argue over with your siblings. The inside temperature of your home is usually just a polite couple of degrees above whatever the weather is doing outside. If it is freezing outdoors, it is politely, slightly less freezing inside. Congratulations. The nights are the worst. Darkness swallows everything. The wind howls through the cracks in the walls like an angry ghost, a constant mournful sound. The fire in the central hearth, the single source of heat and light, sputters pathetically. It does its best, but it mostly just roasts the toes of whoever is sitting closest. If you are on the other side of the room, well, you might as well be camping outside, just with worse snacks. This pervasive cold is not just uncomfortable, it is dangerous. Frostbite, hypothermia, and the general quiet threat of freezing to death are constant risks, especially for the very young and the elderly. Every morning that you wake up, still breathing, your limbs still your own, is considered a minor miracle. It is honestly worth celebrating, perhaps with a slightly less frozen turnip for breakfast. Surviving a medieval winter was not about comfort. It was about gritting your teeth, piling on every piece of cloth you owned, huddling together with your family and your livestock for shared warmth, and praying that you didn't wake up with icicles hanging off your eyebrows. And this, the real adventure of survival, was only just beginning. If you think your modern apartment is drafty because the window doesn't close properly, the medieval peasant would like a word. Their homes are not just drafty, they are, in essence, very enthusiastic wind tunnels with a roof. Most of these peasant houses are what historians politely call wattle and daub construction. This is a rather charming name for a process that involves weaving a lattice of flexible sticks, like a giant loose basket, and then smearing this frame with a mixture of mud, straw, clay, and animal dung. Yes, dung. They are not trying to be gross. Dung is a cheap, sticky, and surprisingly effective insulator. Plus, as they would say, it is always readily available. But these walls, no matter how lovingly smeared, do not stand much chance against a proper winter storm. The cold wind finds every crack, every tiny, unseen gap, and it gleefully dances its way into the single-room homes. It swirls around your ankles, a constant, chilling reminder of the world outside, making sure you are never allowed to get too comfortable. Privacy in such a space? Absolutely not. Warmth? Not really. A profound sense of character building? Definitely. And then there are the roofs. Thatched with thick bundles of straw or reeds, they look picturesque in paintings. But after a few months of being beaten by rain and snow, they begin to sag, they leak, and occasionally they let in the local wildlife. Nothing says, "a pleasant evening," quite like a squirrel dropping from the ceiling onto your dinner pottage. Windows, if a hut is fortunate enough to have them at all, are laughably tiny. They are usually covered with thin, stretched animal hides or with simple wooden shutters. Glass is so fantastically expensive that even the lord of the manor probably cannot afford more than a single, tiny pane for his own hall. The peasants are just happy if the winter wind doesn't rip the cowhide right off the wall in the middle of a blizzard. To make matters worse, the floors are often just compacted dirt. When it rains or snows heavily, moisture seeps up through the ground. So, technically, you could say they have indoor water features, though it is unlikely they appreciate the luxury. In the winter, every step inside your own home can feel like trudging across a frozen marsh. Cold from below, cold from above, cold from all sides. It is a three-dimensional assault on your body heat. But medieval peasants are not the type to whine or surrender. They are masters of ingenuity. They pack the gaps in the walls with moss they have gathered from the woods. They jam old, torn rags into the worst of the drafts. They huddle close to each other, a living, breathing form of human insulation. Creativity, stubbornness, and perhaps a bit of sheep grease rubbed into the walls are often the only things standing between a family and becoming medieval popsicles. Because if your house is falling apart, and your best protection against the elements involves mud and goat hair, well, at least you can laugh about it. Sort of, if your teeth are not chattering too hard. As if the freezing air is not enough of an enemy, the medieval peasant also has to battle a silent, creeping foe that rises from below, the frozen ground itself. The floors, being just slightly flatter patches of earth, are a direct conduit for the cold. And that cold is relentless. It seeps up from the earth like a malevolent spirit, worming its way through the straw, into your bones, and settling deep in your soul. To fight this grim battle, they have a few simple, if imperfect, methods. The most common is layering thick mats of straw across the floor. If you can afford it, or more realistically, if you can steal enough of it from your neighbour's field without getting caught, you might have a decent insulating barrier. But straw has its own problems. It flattens fast under the weight of a family and their livestock. It gets damp from the seeping ground and the leaking roof, and quickly becomes a breeding ground for mould. And it adds a constant, crunchy soundtrack to your already miserable nights. Some homes use dried rushes instead. These long, tough grasses are gathered from riverbanks in the summer and spread thick on the floor. Every so often, when the old layer becomes too trodden down and filthy, they simply throw fresh rushes on top. Over time, this creates a fascinating, layered ecosystem of decomposing plants, fleas, spilled food, lost trinkets, and whatever other mystery creatures decide to move into this medieval carpet padding. If your carpet was alive, slightly damp, and smelled faintly of a wet dog, you would have some idea of the experience. Beds, for those who have them, are not much of a defence against the cold radiating from below. They are usually little more than rough wooden frames, packed with, you guessed it, more straw or hay. Instead of a cosy, supportive mattress, you have a poking, shifting, crunchy layer that does little to insulate you. Tossing and turning at night is not about finding a comfortable position. It is a desperate, awkward dance to keep the blood flowing and to avoid having one side of your body freeze solid while the other remains merely cold. The truth is, medieval peasants do not conquer the icy ground so much as learn to live uncomfortably above it. A good night's sleep is not about soft dreams or restful comfort. It is about waking up with all your toes still attached. And if you can pull that off, in this world, you are doing better than most. If a medieval home has a single hero during the long dark winter, it is the hearth. It is the only real defence against the cold, the darkness, and the overwhelming gloom of it all. At the centre of nearly every peasant home is a simple fire, but it is not the roaring, cheerful blaze you might imagine. There is no grand fireplace with a fancy stone mantel, no neat, efficient chimney sweeping the smoke cleanly skyward. Instead, you have a basic pit dug into the dirt floor, or perhaps a slightly raised platform made of stones. Here, a few half-burned logs smoulder, and a thick, acrid smoke pours into the single room, making you wonder if you are slowly being cured like a ham. That's right. Most peasant homes do not even have chimneys. The smoke just does its best. It drifts upwards, looking for an escape. It might find a small, purpose-built hole in the thatched roof, or it might simply seep out through the countless cracks in the walls. More often than not, it lingers, filling the upper half of the hut with a permanent hazy cloud. This is not ideal for breathing or for your overall lifespan, but on the bright side, it does a fantastic job of fumigating the fleas and other unwanted insect guests. Who needs pest control when you are marinating in wood smoke 24/7? The hearth is not just about warmth either. It is the kitchen, where the single, bubbling pot of pottage hangs day and night. It is the only source of light after the sun goes down. And sometimes, it is the medieval version of television. People sit around the fire telling stories, gossiping about the neighbours, or just staring into the flames because frankly there is not much else to do. Keeping this fire alive is not just a nice idea, it is a mandatory, life-sustaining chore. Letting the fire die out completely at night is like putting up a welcome sign for the cold to come in and finish you off. And reigniting a fire in the dead of winter is not as easy as striking a match. You have to work with a piece of flint and steel, hoping to catch a single precious spark in a bit of dry tinder. You then have to coddle that spark, blowing on it gently, feeding it tiny bits of kindling, and offering up more prayers than you'd ever offered before. Everyone in the family has a duty: stoking the flames, watching the embers, adding a precious piece of dry peat, a few sticks, or if you are very lucky, a small log. It is a constant, wearying battle between human persistence and the smothering cold that wants nothing more than to snuff out your one small flame. The hearth does not guarantee survival, but without it, survival is downright impossible. It is a smoky, sputtering, often disappointing little fire. But in a medieval winter, it is the beating heart of hope. If there is one thing a medieval peasant fears more than running out of ale in the dead of winter, it is letting the fire go out overnight. Without that warm, flickering lifeline, the biting cold would creep in faster than a tax collector after the harvest. And as we've learned, restarting a fire from scratch is not just an inconvenience, it can be a deadly struggle. Matches do not exist yet. Lighters are a distant, magical dream. Rekindling a fire means a desperate, fumbling effort in the freezing dark with frozen fingers. So, the peasants get smart. They master the ancient, crucial art of banking the fire. This has nothing to do with a cosy savings account. Banking the fire is a careful, deliberate process of preserving the embers. Right before the family settles down for the night, someone, usually the head of the household, or the last person awake, will take a stick or a shovel and carefully bury the glowing, red-hot coals under a thick mound of ash from the day's burning. The ash acts like a heavy, insulating blanket. It smothers the flames, but it traps the heat, allowing the coals to smoulder slowly, consuming almost no fuel and keeping them alive just barely until morning. If you do it right, you can simply stroll over to the hearth at sunrise, gently poke the ash pile to reveal the still glowing heart within, add a bit of fresh, dry kindling, Blow gently, and voila, the fire is reborn, without the desperate struggle of flint and steel. But if you do it wrong, well, let's just say the morning gets a whole lot colder and a whole lot grumpier. Firebanking is a delicate art, a skill passed down from parent to child like a prized family recipe. Everyone has their own little secrets, their own trusted methods. Some say you must use only the driest, finest ash. Others insist a bit of dampness is key to slowing the burn. Some pack the embers tight, depriving them of oxygen. Others believe they need a little room to breathe. You could practically start a heated medieval argument just by suggesting a better way to bank a fire. It is the ancient version of arguing over barbecue techniques, just with slightly higher life or death stakes. Sometimes even the most careful banking is not enough. A particularly strong, howling wind might find a new crack in the wall and sneak through, snuffing out the embers with its icy breath. Or, in a home shared with livestock, a clumsy sheep might stumble into the hearth during the night. Yes, it happens. This is why some families take turns getting up in the dead of night, their bare feet slapping on the cold dirt floor just to check on the precious coals. It is the medieval equivalent of a parent sleepwalking to the thermostat to make sure the house is warm. In the end, firebanking is less about mastering nature and more about buying just a few more precious hours of warmth. And if you wake up to find even a single surviving ember, a tiny pulsing heart of red in a sea of grey ash, that is your victory for the night. That is enough to face another day of battling the cold. In medieval times, the phrase, "the more the merrier," is not just about parties, it is a winter survival tactic. When the fire has been banked down to a sullen, sleeping glow, and the freezing winds are whistling through every crack in the walls, there is one final, surefire source of warmth: each other. And if that means sleeping cheek to cheek with your entire family, a few visiting neighbours, your livestock, and possibly a very confused goose, then so be it. Forget about personal space. The concept of privacy is not even a distant dream. On the coldest nights, the goal is not comfort. It is to simply not wake up frozen to the floor. Entire households would pile into the warmest corner of the hut, usually the spot furthest from the drafty door and closest to the residual heat of the hearth. Wrapped in whatever scraps of cloth and wool they could find, they would form what could best be described as a desperate, snoring human lasagna. The layers are strategic. The younger children, small and precious, are squeezed in between their parents. Grandparents, with their slower circulation, might snuggle under the outer layers, sharing the warmth. If Cousin Ethel shows up unexpectedly, seeking refuge from her even draftier hut, well, there is always room for one more. If you are lucky, you get to sleep in the very middle of this human pile, where body heat radiates from all sides, a cocoon of shared warmth. If you are unlucky, you are on the edge, the medieval equivalent of sleeping next to the open door of a meat locker. Woe to the person who moves too much during the night. You shift once to get comfortable, and suddenly you have knocked Aunt Maud into the freezing draught by the wall. Congratulations, you are now the family villain until at least springtime. Sometimes, even the bedding is shared. A single communal straw mattress that slowly flattens under the nightly weight of multiple generations. And because hygiene, as we know, is not exactly winning any awards in this era, let's just say it is not the most fragrant sleeping arrangement. But when it's you versus frostbite, you stop being picky. This communal sleeping is not just a matter of convenience, it is a calculated strategy. Some medieval guides on household management even recommend deliberately arranging the strongest, warmest people on the outside of the group, like human shields against the cold. The babies and the frail elders are tucked deep in the centre, treated like the precious little heat generators they are. This practice, born of desperation, becomes a part of daily life, a part of family bonding. The long, dark winter nights, huddled together in a single breathing mass, lead to storytelling, to quiet singing, and undoubtedly to some very interesting conversations, all muffled under a shared, scratchy wool blanket. So the next time your sibling steals your blanket, or your dog hogs the bed, just remember, at least you're not fighting for elbow room between a snoring uncle and a particularly judgmental goat. If you thought modern roommates who leave their dishes in the sink are a challenge, the medieval peasant would like to introduce you to their winter housemates: cows, goats, pigs, and chickens. Basically, anything with a pulse and a little bit of body heat is invited indoors for the coldest months. Bringing the animals into the one-room hut is not just some quirky, rustic village tradition. It is a vital and deeply practical strategy for survival. Your livestock, particularly a large animal like a cow, are walking, breathing furnaces. They generate a significant amount of warmth, and in a poorly insulated hovel where the wind howls louder than your stomach, every single degree of that warmth matters. There is another, equally important reason. In the dead of winter, when food is scarce and desperation is high, livestock left outside in a flimsy pen are a prime target for theft. A hungry neighbour, or even a pack of wolves, could make off with your family's most valuable asset. If your goat is sleeping on the other side of a thin wattle wall from you, it is slightly less likely to be stolen in the dead of night. It is a case of two birds, one very stinky stone. At night the house becomes a chaotic, living furnace. The chickens might nestle down in a corner, or find a perch in the rafters among the hanging herbs. The pigs, not being particularly concerned with social etiquette, will snort contentedly near the hearth. And the cows, the true kings of the winter household, will lounge luxuriously against the walls, chewing their cud with a rhythmic, meditative calm, as if they pay rent. It is not a glamorous arrangement. Far from it. If you have ever been stuck in a car on a long summer road trip with someone who forgot to shower, imagine that. But now imagine it's a cow, and it's winter, and there is literally nowhere else to go. The smells are legendary. By the time springtime finally arrives, the perfume of a shared winter with your livestock is something fierce. You do not need to light a candle to mask the odour. Your nostrils are already on a wild, untamable ride. But medieval peasants develop a selective sense of smell. They do not complain much, because they understand one simple, uncomfortable truth. The more animals you have inside, the fewer frozen toes you will have in the morning. Certain animals even have prime spots. The cows, being the biggest and warmest, usually take centre stage, often near the family's sleeping area where their massive bodies can radiate heat. The goats, smaller and more agile, are allowed closer in, both for their warmth and because goats, being goats, would find a way inside anyway. Of course, sharing your bedroom with your livestock is not without its hazards. Imagine drifting off into a peaceful sleep, only to be rudely awakened by a chicken deciding that your hair makes a fine and comfortable perch. Or imagine stepping barefoot out of your straw bed first thing in the morning and into something suspicious and still warm. Yes, medieval mornings can be full of surprises. Still, despite the noise, the smells, and the occasional hoof to the ribs in the middle of the night, the peasants understand the simple, life-saving math. Cold kills and cows cuddle, whether they want to or not. In the long, desperate battle against winter's icy fingers, a warm, slightly slobbery cow's breath is often the deciding factor between life and death. In the depths of a medieval winter, fashion is not about looking good, it is about not dying. The peasants are not flipping through the latest seasonal trends from Paris or Milan. They are layering up like they are preparing for a personal, intimate battle against the Grim Reaper himself. The rule is simple and absolute. If you own it, you wear it. Sometimes, all at once. Your day begins with a basic under-tunic, a scratchy, probably not too clean linen shirt that serves as your first line of defence. Over that, you pull on a thicker, heavier woolen tunic. If you are fortunate enough to own a second one, you put that on as well. You add some leggings, likely made of the same coarse wool, which have a tendency to sag at the knees. A rough, heavy cloak is then draped over your shoulders, and if you are truly lucky, a patched-up, greasy sheepskin is thrown on top, worn like a prized trophy of survival. Congratulations. You are now approximately 10% warmer, and 90% itchier. Boots, as we've learned, are a luxury. Many peasants wrap their feet in layers of old cloth or rags, a practice known as foot clouting, and then stuff them into simple wooden clogs or worn-out leather turn, shoes. If the biting cold still seeps through, well, you just add another rag and hope you don't lose a toe to frostbite. And you can forget about washing all these layers. The very idea is absurd. Washing your clothes in the middle of winter means dragging them down to a frozen stream, smashing a hole through the ice with a rock, and then waiting for 2 long days for your only shirt to dry, assuming it doesn't just freeze into a tragic shirt-shaped ice sculpture. Most peasants wisely decide that smelling like a unique blend of wood smoke, sweat, and sheep is a small price to pay for not freezing solid. Interestingly, this accumulation of dirt and grease has a bonus feature. It provides a form of natural insulation. That grimy, caked-on layer helps to clog the tiny gaps in the fabric's weave, making the garment more wind-resistant. It is like a medieval Gore-Tex jacket, just significantly smellier and far less socially acceptable today. In the medieval peasant's playbook, dirt is not just something you scrub off. It is practically a survival tool. Getting grimy is not a sign that you have given up on life. It is tactical, strategic, and dare we say, a bit genius. Some medieval folks even believe that washing yourself too often in winter can actually make you sick by washing away your body's natural protective barrier. Better to keep that holy filth intact. Bathing is a rare event. Laundry is even rarer. And soap, when it exists at all, is a harsh, lye-based substance reserved for very serious occasions like when the bishop shows up for a visit, or maybe right before you die. Adding to the strategy, you just throw your new layer on top of last month's. Eventually, you become a walking museum of the past 6 weeks, every stain telling a heroic story of that one time you slipped in the mud, but did not in fact die. To outside observers, a medieval peasant might look and smell like they have completely given up on hygiene. But the peasant knows better. That grimy, crusty tunic is a thermal shield against death by frostbite. It is not glamorous, but neither is freezing to death because you want it to smell like flowers. Besides, in a world where literally everyone stinks to high heaven, you are not really offending anyone. Nose blindness is practically a way of life. So yes, in medieval winters, filth is not failure. It is fashion, it is function. And if you have a thick, greasy outer layer by the time February rolls around, you, my friend, are winning at life. If you thought that medieval peasants spent their winters tucked into plush feather beds with beautifully embroidered quilts, I invite you to think again. The reality is a bit more rustic. And by rustic, I mean, let's sleep on a pile of dead plants and hope for the best. The bed, in the medieval peasant world, is usually a rough wooden frame if you are fortunate enough to afford one. On top of this frame lies a large sack, often made of coarse burlap, which is then stuffed full of whatever is available. Most commonly, this is straw or hay. That's it. There is no memory foam, no orthopedic support, no 5-star hotel experience. There is just a crunchy, lumpy, slightly pokey mess that smells faintly of a barnyard and deep, deep regret. Every toss and turn in the night brings with it a delightful soundtrack of crinkling, rustling straw, and often the occasional sharp jab in your back from a particularly stubborn rogue stalk. The mattress seems to have a life of its own, shifting and settling under you, ensuring that you can never find a truly comfortable position for more than a few minutes at a time. Some peasants even skip the luxury of the wooden frame altogether. They simply pile the straw straight onto the cold, damp dirt floor, creating a cosy, ground-level sleeping experience that modern influencers would probably rebrand as earth-connected slumber. These straw mattresses are not just uncomfortable, they are temporary. Over time, the straw flattens under the weight of the sleepers. It absorbs moisture from the ground and the air, making it a perfect breeding ground for mould and mildew. It attracts bugs, and it generally turns into a compacted biological hazard zone. Changing the straw is a big event, usually done a few times a year if you are diligent, or whenever your bed starts actively moving on its own, without your permission. Rushes are another popular alternative for bedding. These long, tough grasses are spread thickly on the floor, sometimes mixed with sweet-smelling herbs like lavender or rosemary to try and mask the overwhelming, ever-present odour of livestock and unwashed humanity. Fresh rushes smell lovely for about a day. After that, they become just another part of the muddy, trampled landscape inside the house, blending seamlessly with the dirt, the food scraps, and whatever else has wandered in. And let's not forget the bedfellows. Fleas, lice, and other charming little critters love straw bedding almost as much as the peasants do. It is a warm, protected environment for them to live, breed, and feast. If you wake up in the morning scratching more than you slept, congratulations, you are living the authentic medieval experience. Despite all these hardships, these humble beds are, in their own way, lifesavers. The thick piles of straw provide a crucial insulating layer against the frozen earth below. And as we've learned, clumping together with your entire family on top of one of these mattresses creates precious pockets of shared body heat. It is medieval central heating at its finest. So, the next time you sink into your soft, clean, supportive mattress, just take a moment. Remember that somewhere out there, a medieval peasant is looking down at you from the annals of history, grinning through a mouthful of missing teeth, and saying, "Must be nice." When you live in a house that is essentially made of sticks, mud, and sheer optimism, you quickly learn that the winter breezes are not just a nuisance, they are a personal attack. The medieval peasant does not just fight the cold that waits outside, they fight the cold that is already inside, a guest that has overstayed its welcome and refuses to leave. The battle against the drafts is a constant, ongoing war of attrition. The peasants are armed not with swords and shields, but with whatever they can find to cram into the countless cracks and fissures of their home. And trust me, there are a lot of cracks. Over the seasons, the wooden frame of the hut warps. The daub, that mixture of mud and dung, dries and crumbles. The thatch on the roof sags and shifts. The cold, it seems, can find new, ingenious places to sneak in every single night, like a mischievous poltergeist with a personal grudge. Sealing up the house before the first hard frost becomes an essential, if somewhat desperate, art form. The peasants would stuff the larger gaps with handfuls of dried moss they had gathered from the forest floor. Straw, left over from the harvest, is twisted into tight bundles and jammed into crevices. Scraps of old, worn-out cloth, rags too far gone to even patch their clothing with, are given a second life as draft stoppers. Sometimes, even loose animal hair, shed by the cows and goats, is collected and used as a form of crude, if smelly, insulation. If it is soft, squishy, or vaguely insulating, it is jammed into a hole somewhere. Some particularly determined souls would undertake an annual winter project of redaubing their homes. Imagine standing there, in the freezing, late autumn weather, slapping a fresh layer of cold, wet manure and mud onto the outside of your own house, while muttering to yourself, "This is fine. This is luxury." Because in a way it is. Every new layer is another thin shield against the coming darkness. Roof leaks are another constant battlefield. Thatch, while cheap and plentiful, is not exactly waterproof, especially after a few seasons of being battered by rain and snow. The peasants would climb onto their roofs and plug the holes with spare bits of cloth, with fresh bundles of reeds, or, in moments of true desperation, with large chunks of turf, grass, and all, stolen from the nearest field. By midwinter, every home starts to look like a slightly sad, lumpy patchwork quilt, made by someone who gave up halfway through. The doors and windows, if you can call them that, are a primary source of infiltration. A door is little more than a few rough planks of wood, hung by iron nails and sheer stubbornness. The window holes, as we know, are often covered with animal hides or thick cloth that has been soaked in animal fat to make it more water resistant. This also adds a bonus aroma of mystery meat to the living space. Every night is a new battle between human ingenuity and the relentless, sneaky cold. One minute, you might feel almost warm, huddled by the fire. The next minute, a sudden, icy gust will find the one tiny spot you missed, slapping you awake like a frosty hand of doom. Yet somehow, through a combination of cleverness, stubbornness, and a flat-out refusal to accept slightly frozen as a permanent state of being, the medieval peasants patch, stuff, and muddle their way through the worst that winter can throw at them, one muddy handful at a time. When the cold bites hard enough to seep into your bones and keep you awake at night, the medieval peasant has a solution. It is not a perfect solution. It is not a comfortable solution, but it is a solution born of pure, pragmatic desperation. They do not even try to pretend that everyone can sleep through the night at once. Instead, they develop a survival strategy that today would make a military commander proud. They sleep in shifts. This is not some grand, organised system with whistles and formal roll calls. It is far simpler, and much more organic than that. It is an unspoken agreement within the family. While one half of the household curls up under the threadbare blankets and piles of hay, trying to catch a few precious hours of half-frozen, fitful sleep, the other half stays awake. Their job, to keep the fire alive and to fight the constant war against the drafts. The fire, as we know, needs constant, vigilant attention. Left alone for too long, it would die down to nothing but cold, grey ash. So someone has to be on ember patrol. And since no one, absolutely no one, wants to get up once they have finally achieved a state of being that is slightly warmer than frozen, the families rotate the shifts. Imagine it. You doze for a few hours, lost in a shallow, uneasy dream. Then you feel an elbow nudge you awake. It is your turn. You stumble out of the warm human pile, your joints stiff, your eyelids heavy as stones. You make your way to the hearth, trying your best not to step on a sleeping goat or your younger brother. You poke, you prod, you gently blow on the embers, and you curse the sputtering fire back to life. This rotation is not glamorous. There are no night vision goggles, no late night snacks from the pantry, and certainly no 5 more minutes snooze button. There are just your stiff, cold joints, your heavy eyelids, and a growing, deep-seated resentment toward whichever family member happens to snore the loudest during your shift. The children, once they are old enough to be trusted with a stick and a basic understanding of not setting the hut on fire, are pressed into service. They learn from a very young age that in the winter, everyone pulls their weight, or everyone freezes. The grandparents, the elders of the family, sometimes stay by the fire for longer shifts. This is partly because of their experience and wisdom in managing a fire, and frankly, partly because their arthritis makes the process of lying down and getting up again a monumental, painful event. And when it is finally your turn to sleep again, good luck finding true rest. With other people moving about, with the animals rustling and sighing in the darkness, with the wind battering the thin walls, and with the occasional sharp nudge from a sibling who has accidentally rolled over too hard, getting quality, deep sleep is a rare and precious miracle. Yet, despite the constant exhaustion, the system works. Sleeping in shifts means that there is always a set of weary eyes and a pair of cold, begrudging hands ready to keep the hearth alive. The embers survive. And by extension, so does the family. So the next time you grumble about waking up in the night to adjust the thermostat, or to let the cat out, spare a thought for the medieval peasant, squinting into a smoking, sullen fire at 3 a.m, wondering if having toes is really all that important, after all. You know it is cold when you have to consciously think about how you breathe, just to stay alive. The medieval peasants do not just battle the freezing air with their cloaks, their fires, and their creative sleeping arrangements. In the deepest, darkest nights of winter, they even adjust the very way they inhale and exhale, turning the simple, unconscious act of breathing into a deliberate tool for survival. The problem is a simple one, and a deadly one. Deep, open-mouthed breathing, the kind you might do after a long run, pulls the icy winter air straight into your lungs. In a world where a simple respiratory infection like pneumonia could kill you faster than you could say, "Hail Mary," That is a risk that nobody is willing to take. The shock of that cold air hitting your sensitive lung tissue is not only painful, it is an open invitation to illness. So the peasants learn, through generations of trial and error, the subtle art of what you might call survival breathing. Instead of sucking in huge gasping gulps of air, they keep their breathing shallow. They breathe slowly, deliberately, and most importantly, they breathe through the nose. The idea, whether they understand the science of it or not, is to force the incoming air to travel a longer, warmer path before it reaches their lungs. The nasal passages help to humidify and warm the air just a bit. It is not perfect, it does not turn a freezing breath into a warm one, but it takes the edge off. It makes the air less of a shock to the system. It is a small, subtle defense, but in a world of marginal gains, it matters. If you accidentally take a big, sharp mouthful of cold air while you are talking or yawning, the result is an immediate, painful coughing fit. And that cough could last for a week, leaving you weak and vulnerable. With no real doctors in sight, the only treatment is Grandma's remedy of hot onion tea and some very firm prayers. To further aid this process, some people would even tuck parts of their cloaks, their shawls, or a spare rag up over their faces while they slept. They would create a makeshift breath warmer, a barrier that traps a small pocket of their own warm, exhaled air, which then helps to heat the next incoming breath. Of course, this also means that you often end up with a damp, slightly soggy fabric patch clinging to your mouth by morning. But hey, it beats freezing from the inside out. The children are taught these tricks from a very young age. Parents would quietly scold their little ones for panting like dogs when they played indoors during the cold months. And honestly, between the strict breathing lessons, the itchy wool layers, and sleeping next to an aggressively gassy goat, a medieval childhood in winter is character building on a whole different level. At night, tucked into the communal straw bedding, under the heavy piles of cloaks, and next to a gently steaming cow, breathing becomes a conscious art form. Slow, steady, through the nose only, and as minimal as humanly possible. It is like some grim, medieval version of a yoga retreat, only with more frostbite and significantly fewer inspirational quotes. In the grand survival playbook of the medieval peasant, this is not the flashiest strategy, but it works. One shallow, careful breath at a time, they endure another night in the long, relentless war against winter. In the endless, desperate battle against the medieval winter, the peasants discover an unlikely and powerful secret weapon. It is not another scratchy wool cloak. It is not a bigger fire. It is a full stomach. It turns out that one of the best and most effective ways to fight off the creeping, bone-deep chill of a winter's night is to stuff yourself with something hearty and heavy right before you go to bed. The logic is simple, and it is a form of basic, intuitive thermodynamics. Calories mean warmth. The more food your body has to work to digest, the more internal heat it generates in the process. It is like stoking a small, slow-burning furnace right in your own belly. If you eat a heavy meal, your body will work all through the long, dark night to break it down, and that work produces a steady, gentle trickle of life-sustaining warmth. It might be the difference that allows you to survive until morning without turning into a peasant-shaped popsicle. So, what exactly do the medieval peasants pile onto their wooden plates before a long, freezing night? You must think in terms of density. Thick stews, heavy with starchy root vegetables like turnips, onions, and parsnips, are a staple. These are vegetables that can be stored for months in a root cellar, and they form the backbone of the winter diet. Grains are absolute lifesavers. A bowl of thick oat porridge or a hearty barley gruel is not just a meal, it is an investment in warmth. And the bread, as always, is dense, chewy, and substantial. If you are especially lucky, say after a festival day, or a generous slaughter by the lord of the manor, you might even get a small, precious hunk of salted pork, or a thick slice of dried sausage thrown into the pot. This is not comfort food in the way we think of it today. There is no delicate presentation, no artisanal garnishes. It is one enormous, vaguely brown, and intensely practical meal. It is designed to sit in your gut like a friendly, warm brick, slowly releasing its energy, its heat throughout the night. It is not just about eating a lot, it is about eating smart. The peasants understand, without knowing the science, that some foods provide warmth for longer. Fatty foods are particularly prized, not just for the sheer number of calories they provide, but because fat burns slower than lean meat or simple carbohydrates. A bellyful of stew, bread, and a questionable but highly effective amount of lard is the peak of medieval winter luxury. The parents make sure that even the pickiest of children eat heartily before bed. Nobody cares if little Thomas doesn't particularly like the taste of boiled turnips. You eat the turnips, or you will shiver through the night, thinking longingly about how much you miss those turnips. It is a harsh but effective form of parenting. Of course, this strategy of heavy nighttime eating comes with its own set of minor hazards. You might be warmer, but you are also risking a night of vivid, bizarre, and often unsettling dreams, fueled by a stomach that is desperately trying to process an entire field's worth of cabbages. But is it worth it? Absolutely. Because in the end, the medieval peasants are not aiming for a Michelin star meal, they are aiming to survive. And if that means going to bed full, bloated, and breathing gently through your nose next to a gently steaming cow, well, that is just another successful night in the ongoing quest to see another frosty, beautiful sunrise. Long before the age of electric blankets and fancy heated mattress pads, the medieval peasant has to get creative if they want a little extra, localized warmth at bedtime. Fires, as we know, are temperamental, and body heat can only do so much. And so, from the simple elements of their world stone, fire, and hay, they devised two of winter's most unsung and ingenious heroes, the humble haybox and the ever-glamorous heated stone. Let's start with the haybox. It sounds rustic, and it absolutely is, but the idea behind it is pure practical genius. The peasants would take a sturdy wooden box, or even just a designated, well-insulated corner of the hut, and line it thickly with dry hay or straw. Hay is a fantastic natural insulator. They would use this box to store food that had been cooked earlier in the day, keeping it warm for hours. A pot of leftover stew, or some hot porridge, could be placed in the hay box, covered with more hay, and it would stay hot enough for a late-night snack, or for the person taking the midnight watch, without needing to risk reigniting the main fire. It is, in essence, a medieval slow cooker. But the peasants do not just stop at food. They soon realise that if hay can trap the heat from a pot of stew, it can also trap the heat from something even better, rocks. And so, we enter the era of the heated stone. Before the family heads to bed for the night, someone probably, whichever unlucky child loses, the family argument would be tasked with a crucial job. They would select a flat, smooth stone about the size of a loaf of bread and chuck it into the heart of the hearth fire. There, the stone would sit, absorbing the intense heat, until it is nearly too hot to touch. There is a fine line to walk here between helpfully warm and third-degree burn. Once the stone is sufficiently roasted, they would fish it out of the embers using a long stick or some old repurposed tongs. The stone, now radiating a blissful, almost magical warmth, would be carefully wrapped in multiple layers of old rags. It has to be wrapped well, otherwise it could set the straw bedding on fire. This warm, cloth-wrapped bundle is then slipped deep under the hay of the mattress, or placed down at the foot of the bed. It is a medieval heating pad, a personal, portable radiator, ready to do battle against the frozen, unforgiving earth. Of course, there are risks. If you do not wrap the stone properly, congratulations, you now have a small, localized house fire smouldering in your bed. And if you happen to drop the heavy, hot stone on your foot in the dark, well, let's just say that not all winter injuries are caused by slipping on the ice. But when everything goes right, that simple, heated stone provides a precious, comforting warmth that can last for hours. It is not luxurious, it is not sophisticated. But when you live in a half-frozen hut, Luxury is defined as not waking up with icicles dangling from your nose. In the grand, and often desperate, arsenal of medieval winter survival, a hot rock tucked into a pile of hay might not sound glamorous, but for the peasants clinging to whatever small pockets of heat they can find, it is a tiny, glowing miracle. In a medieval peasant's home, the hearth is not just a place where you cook dinner. In the winter, it is the Sunday. It is the centre of the household's tiny, smoky universe. And when it comes time to sleep, your proximity to this sun determines your chances of a comfortable, or even a survivable, night. The space around the fire is the most valuable real estate in the entire village. Sleeping arrangements are therefore less about personal preference and more about a complex, unspoken system of strategic positioning. The infants, the elderly, and anyone who is sick or frail get first dibs on the prime spots. This is not just a matter of kindness. It is a matter of basic, pragmatic survival math. The very young and the very old are the most vulnerable to the cold. Their bodies cannot regulate temperature as efficiently. Therefore, they are placed closest to the fire's residual warmth, often in a small nest of the thickest straw and the best blankets the family owns. The parents, the older children, and any other able-bodied adults fan out from this warm central core like layers of human insulation. Being assigned a spot close to the fire is a sign of your value or your vulnerability. Babies are not only fragile, but they are also seen as the future of the family. The elders are precious repositories of a lifetime of knowledge of farming techniques, of herbal remedies, and let's be honest, of the best village gossip. Protecting them with the gift of prime warmth is a non-negotiable part of the family contract. But this coveted position is not all cosy, blissful toasting by the flames. Sleeping too close to the hearth carries its own risks. A stray spark could fly out and land on your woolen cloak, causing it to smoulder. You could risk waking up with your hair slightly singed, or with one side of your body uncomfortably hot while the other remains stubbornly frozen. Sleeping too far away, on the other hand, means you are essentially camping in an icebox. It is a delicate, nightly dance of finding the perfect distance, near enough to bask in the fire's gentle, radiant glow, but not so near that you have to explain to your neighbour the next day why you now look like a half-cooked roast. The fire, of course, does not spread its warmth evenly throughout the one-room hut. It mostly just heats the air directly in front of it. The family members must therefore fight over the narrow, precious cone of heat, like a group of cold, sleepy lizards jostling for the best spot on a sun-warmed rock. If you are lucky enough to fall asleep facing the fire, you might enjoy one blissfully warm side, while the side facing the dark, cold hut remains so solid you could probably knock on it. The pets and the livestock, of course, muscle in on this geography as well. The family dog might wedge itself into the warmest spot, right between you and the fire, its tail wagging dangerously close to the open flame. The chickens, seeking warmth, sometimes perch perilously on the stones of the hearth, clucking softly into the night, like tiny, feathery guardians of the embers. Every crackle of the logs, every soft shift of the glowing coals, is a tiny, reassuring promise in the vast, cold darkness. You are still alive? It seems to whisper. You are still warm. For now. And so, the peasants would drift into an uneasy, shallow sleep, lulled by the fire's gentle pops and hisses, each of their breaths forming small, ghostly clouds in the frigid air that lay just beyond the fire's fragile golden circle. It is not perfect. It is not comfortable. But it is life, clinging to warmth by a single, slender thread of glowing coals. In the medieval world, no one survives the winter alone. Or at least, they do not survive for very long. If an individual wanted to become a very stylish and very permanent frozen statue by the time January rolled around, solitude was the quickest path. Survival is not just a family affair. It is a village project. It is a messy, muddy, often loud collaboration, where everyone's warmth and everyone's life depends on the warmth and life of everyone else. The peasants understand, in a way that is bone deep and requires no words, that in the dead of winter, a strong fire and a thick pile of hay can only do so much. Your own small flame of life is fragile, but a village full of small flames, huddled together against the darkness, creates a much stronger light. If your neighbour's house goes dark and silent for too long, you notice. If the thin grey wisp of smoke from old Tom's hearth suddenly stops curling into the sky in the morning, someone goes to check. And it is not just because Tom might owe you a chicken, though that might certainly be part of the motivation. It is because the community is a body, and a sickness in one part can quickly spread to the whole. The villages have their own unofficial winter watchers. Often, these are the young children, too small for heavy labour, or the elderly, whose own work in the fields is done. They become the eyes and ears of the village. They keep a quiet, informal watch on who is coughing too hard, who has not come to the well to draw water for a few days, or whose hut looks a little too still and silent in the morning frost. These people are the medieval version of a neighbourhood patrol, minus the reflective vests, and with a lot more sheep. If a family's fire goes out completely, perhaps because their wood is wet or they have run out of fuel, it is treated as a near emergency. A good neighbour would not just offer their sympathies, they would rush over with a glowing, precious coal from their own fire, carefully bundled in damp rags or carried in a small covered pot. Or, better yet, they might invite the entire freezing family into their own smoky, already overcrowded hut for the night. Yes, it means squeezing another 4 or 5 shivering bodies into an already cramped space. But it is infinitely better than finding a family of frozen friends come the spring thaw. Communal food stores, though meagre, also play a crucial role. During especially brutal winters, when personal stores of salted meat, grain and dried vegetables run dangerously low, the village might pool what little they have left. It is a grim form of charity, as no one has much to spare. But a few communal meals, a shared pot of thin pottage, can be the difference between a village that staggers into spring and one that does not. Even the children understand the stakes. They are tasked with delivering bundles of wood to the elderly, with sharing embers between households, and with running urgent, breathless messages when someone needs help. No one is too small or too tired when winter comes knocking at the door. Of course, medieval villages are not all sunshine and communal hugs. Feuds happen. Disputes over land, over livestock, or over who borrowed whose good cooking pot and never returned it, never really go away. But when the nights grow long and deadly cold, the most bitter of grudges are often, quietly, shelved. After all, even your most annoying rival is still worth saving. Because tomorrow, it might be you who needs to be rescued from the icy heart of winter. The village becomes one big, stubborn, and sometimes dysfunctional family, always fiercely determined to survive. Together, one muddy boot, one crackling ember, and one frozen, hopeful smile at a time. When we look back across the centuries at the medieval peasant, a figure so often rendered as a muddy, anonymous face in the background of history, it is tempting to see only the hardship. We see the cracked hands, the frozen toes, the smoke-choked huts, the endless, grinding struggle for survival. But buried beneath all that profound and daily suffering is something far more powerful, something that echoes down to our own time. A legacy of raw, stubborn ingenuity and an unbreakable, quiet endurance. They did not have central heating, they did not have thermal jackets, or vitamin supplements, or a grocery store filled with food from around the world. They did not even have the simple, profound luxury of assuming that they would survive until spring. But what they did have, and what they left behind for all of us, was the blueprint for resilience. Every hay-stuffed mattress, a simple barrier against the frozen earth, was an act of defiance. Every carefully banked fire, a tiny ember nursed through the long dark night, was a testament to human foresight and care. Every moss-crammed gap in a wattle and daub wall was a small victory, a moment of creative problem-solving in the face of impossible odds. Faced with a world that seemed determined to freeze them out, they did not collapse in despair. They adapted. They learned from the unforgiving land. They learned from each other. And they learned from the bitter, painful lessons that were carved into their lives by each brutal passing winter. Their communities were built on more than just shared land. They were built on a foundation of shared survival. They taught each other to watch over the sick, to pool their meagre resources when food ran low, to trust that helping a freezing neighbour today meant that someone might be there to help you tomorrow. They lived by the deep, unspoken understanding that no one, absolutely no one, beats the winter alone. Their faith, too, was a form of endurance. They wove their prayers and their superstitions into the very fabric of their daily lives, not just out of a fear of damnation, but out of a desperate, fragile, and stubborn hope. A hope that tomorrow might be a little warmer, a little brighter. A hope that after 100 dark and seemingly endless nights, the spring would, eventually, come again. A hope that life, in all its tenacity, would find a way to push up through the frozen ground once more. And somehow, it always did. Because of their sacrifices, because of their small, unglamorous daily victories, future generations were able to thrive. Bit by frozen, painful bit, they pushed humanity forward. They endured winters that their own ancestors could barely survive, until warmth and comfort slowly, over centuries, became common expectations instead of distant, impossible dreams. Their blood, their sweat, and their incredible unrecognized ingenuity are stitched invisibly into the very fabric of the lives we live now. Every cozy blanket we pull over ourselves, every warm house that shelters us from the storm, every lazy winter evening we spend sipping tea under soft, gentle lights, all of it, in some small way, is the end result of countless medieval peasants simply refusing to give in to the cold. So, as we leave their world behind, perhaps we can spare a thought for them, the nameless, fearless, forgotten ones who turned shivering survival into a living legacy. One ember, one breath, and one stubborn, hopeful heartbeat at a time.